All right, good evening, everyone. We'll be talking about the top 10 reasons we know that the New Testament writers were not lying. We'll go ahead and just open with a prayer, and then we can dive right in. Father, thank you so much for Jesus. Thank you so much for this wonderful church family that we have to gather together in the middle of the week and recharge and remind ourselves of what's most important and who's most important in our lives. Not just you especially, of course, Father, but also our brethren, knowing that we're all going to our jobs in various places and interacting with the world. And Father, we ask for your help and your wisdom to reach those around us with love, but also with truth, and that you would grant us boldness and courage, and that you would help use this quarter to equip us to be able to have better conversations with our friends and our families around us so that more might come to you and increase your glory in your kingdom. Father, thank you for the opportunity to study this material. Thank you for giving us so much evidence to study. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so last Wednesday, we learned that the New Testament documents were better preserved, easily, hands down, than any other document in ancient history. On Sunday, we learned that they were written by eyewitnesses or by those who knew the eyewitnesses, and they bear all the marks of authenticity in terms of eyewitness testimony. Now, tonight we're going to ask, were they lying though? So, maybe they were just super geniuses who made their eyewitness testimony look really convincing, but it was all just one elaborate hoax, to say that Jesus resurrected from the dead and performed all these miracles, but he really did not. A couple weeks ago on our YouTube channel, an atheist called me a liar repeatedly and said, shame on me, repeatedly, for lying about Darwin in the class that I taught on evolution. And I explained to him that there is a big difference between a lie and a misunderstanding. A lie is intentional deception. And I told him it was a serious insult to my character to call me a liar. And I asked how he expected to convince me of his side by insulting me. I also told him, I believe in God and you don't. God says liars go to hell, so I guarantee you I take lying more seriously than you do. Sometimes when you have hard-hearted people, and he was a very, very hard-hearted person, you have to be kind of blunt with them, so only language that they understand. Now, I did admit to him, it is certainly possible that I misunderstood what Darwin taught about evolution, and I said I'd be happy if you want to lay out some arguments and just explain to me, what I misunderstood. Then I will accept that correction. But he never did explain to me. I asked him multiple times, would not give me a reason at all. So instead, what I did was I took an article from evolutionnews.org, which, as you can tell, is not a Christian-friendly website. And I sent him this article that basically said that everything that I said about Darwin was absolutely true. And of course, he had no response to it. He was, mainly just trolling and just trying to pick a fight. Now, I told you about that because it's a serious insult to the writer's character of the New Testament, right? To say that this group of Jews, who, by the way, were raised on the law of Moses and knew the difference between right and wrong, to say that they were liars is hugely insulting. That's a massive, massive accusation. And we're going to explore it anyway, okay? And we're going to look at the top 10 reasons we know that they were not. Now, on Sunday, this coming Sunday, we will ask, was it just a misunderstanding? We will tackle that angle. Did they think that Jesus rose from the dead, but they weren't really right about that? And that's what Tim will get into on Sunday, Lord willing. But tonight we'll ask about lying. All right. So here's my first question: what typically motivates people to lie? Now, I typed in a Google search on this one, and I found a really good article on pauleckman.com. It was actually 9 different motivations that he listed, but Any ideas from you all this evening on what typically motivates people to lie? I should have just said, oh, I did. Okay. My notes say what motivates human beings to lie. They're the ones that lie, so didn't need to say human beings. Just calling people. Yeah, Matt.
Personal gain,
all right.
Riches or fame or power or something.
Sure, you're trying to gain some benefit for yourself. Yeah, Jared, and then Brinson.
Broadly, I would just say self-interest.
Yeah, over there. Okay, yes. Okay, self-interest, right? Kind of along that similar vein. All right, Brenson's got one. There you go.
Oh.
Yep.
Maybe people fear the consequences that come with telling the truth.
There you go. Yeah, you're afraid of punishment, afraid of something negative, happening to you. We could put things with this, like real examples with all these that you're mentioning. If someone's late for work and, they've been late at work multiple times and, they know they're going to get in trouble this time. It's like, well, they tell the boss, well, no, I was already here. I just forgot to clock in. Right? So they're trying to lie to cover that up, trying to gain some sort of benefit maybe that you wouldn't normally have. This is why people might lie on their job resumes about their work experience, because they're thinking, well, if I don't lie, I probably won't get hired here. Yeah, Charisma?
This probably is fairly similar to all the other ones, but protect themselves or somebody that they care about from a consequence.
Okay, yeah. So that's another angle, is you're protecting someone else as well from harm. This is the Nazis, right, banging on the door in Germany, and people are hiding Jews in their house, and they lie to the Nazis because they don't want them to kill the Jews. So they're actually lying to protect someone. This actually happens in the Bible too. Rahab, right, lies to protect the spies, and that's a whole other discussion. But God does seem to value human life over the truth in those particular scenarios. Let's see what else I have here. We try to prop ourselves up and make ourselves look good. So we might, embellish the good attributes about ourselves to make people think that we're great. We might downplay the negative things as well. For instance, I could have told you all that this list of 9 things, this is what I came up with, right? Instead of telling you that I got it from a Google search, from some website, I could make myself look really smart by saying, what do you guys think about this amazing list that I came up with? To exercise power or control over people. This is Hitler, right? Lying about the Jews and they're not human, all that stuff, inferior race, all that to give him power and control over that group. How about, did somebody else have a hand? Okay, no. How about to get out of an awkward social situation, right? If someone's on a date's not going well, right? They're like, I feel my phone vibrating, work emergency, gotta go. Maybe it's to maintain privacy. You just don't, there's some things you just don't want to share with people. Maybe sometimes it's to spare their feelings. They ask you how you feel about their new haircut or something. I'm like, well, it's the most hideous thing I've ever seen, but I don't want to tell you that, right? And so maybe I just say, oh, great, looks great, and I move on. It could just be other things that you don't want to disclose to somebody because you're not close enough to them, and so maybe you make something else up. I'm not endorsing these forms of lying, maybe with the exception of saving someone's life who's hiding in your house from being murdered. That might be the only exception. But at this point, can you see that none of these 8 to 9 typical reasons for lying could possibly be reasons for the New Testament writers to lie? If they were lying, it wouldn't fit any of those categories. And I got to be honest, I don't really know what category it would fit. I don't even know what motivation they possibly could have for lying. And we'll see, why that's the case the further we go. Let me ask this question, though. I'm recognizing my notes are too long tonight, so I'll probably just answer this one, and then I'll give you the next question for you to answer. What factors typically make it hard to get away with telling a lie? I thought of 4 things here. I did actually think of this. This wasn't a Google search. If there are other people who know the truth, then you can be, falsified. If you lie to the boss, embellish, and tell him, oh yeah, I was a big help on this project, without me this thing wouldn't have got done. Well, then there's some other people who really worked on the project and they know that's not true, like he barely did anything. Well, now I'm at risk of being exposed because there are other people around than me who know the truth. Secondly, if I'm suffering for the lie, I'm probably not going to keep up the charade very long, right? Especially if somebody's threatening, my life. 3, one lie usually leads me to have to tell another lie to keep it going, right? Sometimes we use the phrase web of lies because once you start going down the road of making stuff up, you realize, well, I got to make a whole bunch of other stuff up and I got to fill in all the made up backstory that I came up with. And it feels like a web, like you're trapped because you can't move, because you know, like, okay, if I say one wrong thing, like this entire charade can just, come crashing down. And then the fourth thing is we might get pressed for details. Okay, so you can get away with lies if they're vague, like saying to someone, I couldn't come to your party because I was out of town, when the real answer is I didn't really want to go. Okay, but she said, well, I'm out of town. well, then they start asking you, oh, where'd you go? And how was it? And did you take pictures? Can you show me pictures? Who went with you? Now you're in trouble, okay, because they're pressing you for details. That makes it hard to get away with telling lies. So just those four things, and you guys might have come up with more. Do you see how if we use just those four criteria, the apostles, the writers of the New Testament were in a situation where it would have been very hard to get away with a lie? Because there were many other people around at the time who could have exposed the lie. They suffered great persecution for the lie. There's no way they could have gotten away. Think about this. There's no way they could have gotten away with just telling one lie about Jesus. Wouldn't they? If you just tell the lie that Jesus resurrected from the dead, aren't there a lot of other lies that are going to have to kind of precede that lie? Yeah, you're going to have to construct this huge web, and you're involving multiple people, right? It's not just you, but multiple people are in on this giant web of lies. And that's just incredibly risky, incredibly difficult to pull off. And as we talked about on Sunday, they weren't vague at all. They're incredibly specific in their details. Here's third question, and this one I'll let you guys jump in on. Why wouldn't it make sense for the apostles to lie about Jesus? I'm not actually asking our main question tonight, which is, here are all the reasons why we know they weren't lying. I guess I'm relating it back to the first question. Based on what we know about the typical motivations for people to lie, why wouldn't it make sense for the apostles to lie at all in the first place? Yeah, Jared?
It goes back to the general statement that I made about lying being in your self-interest. It was not in their self-interest to believe in Jesus.
Yeah.
They had absolutely nothing to gain by lying about that.
No, yeah, exactly right. We talked about avoiding negative consequences, avoiding punishment. This lie, that's all it did, was bring negative consequences in their life. This lie brought persecution and a life full of rejection and suffering and ultimately being killed. All the apostles, all the original writers, I think with the exception of John, were killed, were martyred for their faith. So why make up a lie? It's just going to get you all killed. All right, anything else on that? How about this one? Let's use charisma as an example. It didn't protect their loved ones from punishment either. It meant death for all their friends and family too. Everybody who became a Christian, everybody else who bought into this lie, all their loved ones and their family, they're dead too. So that would make sense to lie to protect your loved ones. It didn't make them look good. This lie said that they're all miserable sinners who are deserving of death from God. Wow, I really want to make that lie up. That sounds terrible. Sorry, Ryan, I didn't see you, buddy, back there. It didn't give them power over people. It gave people power over them. Now, you could argue, well, they became apostles, and so, they had this spokesmanship, and they could, speak with the authority of Jesus, so it was a position of power. Did the world view the apostles as powerful? Not really. And even Christians themselves gave the apostles problems. We've been talking in our daily Bible reading about all the emotional struggles that he's been having with the Corinthians because they're questioning his motives, and they think because he's suffering so much that he's not a legitimate apostle. And all. It's just Paul is going to pull his hair out, right, with all the struggles and conflicts that he has even with Christians. Okay, but it's not like we're an apostle, and as soon as they say that, like the whole world just falls in line and does everything that they say. No, they didn't have power. And finally, they were devout Jews. Remember in my conversation with that atheist on YouTube, I told him how unlikely it was that I'm lying because I know God punishes liars in hell. Well, these were Jews. The original New Testament writers, with the exception of Luke, right, they were all Jews who were raised under the law of Moses' system. And one of the 10 commandments, Jeff's got one of the 10 commandments is not to bear false witness. So they understand this is displeasing to their God. So to accuse them of colluding on this massive, massive lie is a huge insult to their character and really something that would be completely out of line with their character and who they were. All right, Jeff?
Yeah, I agree with all that. One thing that I noticed, though, was there was a lie about Jesus' resurrection, and that was the one spread by the guards that Matthew records, where the chief priests paid the guards money to spread this lie that his disciples came and stole him at night. And I was trying to figure out how to deal with that and see if this works. That was a lie that apparently it says, and this story has been spread among the Jews to this day, but apparently it didn't take hold. You could see through that lie, and this account of what happened, people could see that was the truth, and
Yeah.
so it did take hold and go forward. So
For sure.
lies can be found out,
Yes.
over time, and what the guards were saying, it was found out that was a lie.
Yeah, and so on Sunday, Tim's going to deal with that lie, that theory of Jesus' resurrection, that the disciples stole the body. He's going to deal with that. But what's interesting is tonight's class in the book, Turek points out that if you were lying and making this up, you would never put a story like that in the account, that here's a lie that's been spread to this day, because you wouldn't want to give your enemies any ammunition at all, right? To leave a door open that here's another possible theory. But they do. Why? Because that's just what happened. They talked about this lie that the disciples stole the body, and so they recorded it. Yeah, really good. So I asked those three questions just to paint a broad picture, but let's get into some specifics now about the top 10 reasons we know they weren't lying. Number one, and I'll also get questions from you on some of these as well. They include embarrassing details about themselves. Remember, one of the motivations for lying is to make yourself look good. Yet in the New Testament writings, especially in the Gospels, the writers, they don't look very good at all. The original disciples look terrible. And here's my question. What are some embarrassing details about the writers that they include in the documents? You guys think of any off the top of your head? All right, Carrie Ann's got one. Jeff's got one. Joe's got one. Yeah, go ahead, Carrie.
I know it wasn't written about by himself, but Peter's denial of Jesus, I definitely wouldn't want someone knowing that I did that.
Yeah, there you go. And interesting, you said, it wasn't really written by Peter, but think about it. Peter was one of the pillars of the early church movement. He's the founder in Acts chapter 2 in terms of establishing the church there on Pentecost. So if he's a pillar in the church, why would you write a document showing how terrible Peter is? I mean, let's harp on Peter for a second. Denies 3 times that he knows Jesus. He starts sinking in the water. Jesus has to rebuke him for not having faith. Jesus calls Peter Satan, okay, at one point. So, yeah, Peter's made to look pretty bad. Yeah, Joe?
That's who I was going to mention, but maybe the concept of those guys hanging out with Judas and the betrayal and stuff like that. I wouldn't ever want to write down, hey, I was hanging out with Fred over here, and
That's a good point.
no. Let's not talk about that. So maybe that would be one.
They were all duped. I mean, they're writing
everybody.
that
All 11.
Judas pulled one over on everybody except Jesus. He knew. Yeah. Brandon, and then Jeff has one.
All of Paul's life before he was converted.
Yeah, he's a murderer. Yeah, he wrote. Paul himself talked about himself and wrote about himself as a horrible person who was murdering Christians. Jeff?
They're arguing between James and John about who's going to be one. I guess they were arguing against the other apostles about who's going to be the greatest.
Yes.
And also, I thought about when they all fled from Jesus in the garden when the guards came.
Absolutely.
That's not something you'd want to put in your book.
Yeah, there's so many dim-witted conversations between the disciples, and Jesus is just face palm, basically whoa, why are you guys talking about this? And then the cowardly abandonment of Jesus. They fall asleep on Jesus 3 times while he's in the garden. The disciples, remember, they panic in the storm. We're all gonna die. They got Jesus with them in the boat, and they think they're gonna die. Thomas, he doubts the resurrection. The disciples fail to cast out a demon from a boy, and Jesus has to rebuke them for their lack of faith for failing to do that. Basically, the disciples are pictured as dim-witted, uncaring, rebuked, cowardly doubters. And if the disciples, this is the question, wanted to concoct a lie about Jesus' life, why in the world would they make up a story that makes them sound so bad? Who does that? Okay, and this, by the way, this is a bonus point that helps us understand the veracity of the Old Testament as well, because the entire Old Testament was written by Israelites, and the whole Old Testament says Israelites are the worst, and they fail, and they never get it right, and they're terrible. And that was written by themselves. They wrote that about themselves. You wouldn't do that. If you're trying to preserve your nation's history, most nations don't preserve their failures unless they actually happened, and the Israelites would have no motivation to lie about that and make themselves sound like the worst nation ever, in history, unless that's actually what happened. And the whole book is about God, really, and their sinfulness compared to God's holiness. All right. Secondly, they include embarrassing details about Jesus. Now, you would think if their goal was to lie about Jesus so the whole world would believe in him, that all they would do is prop him up and make him look great. But instead, they tell how Jesus' own family said that he had lost his mind. In John 6, thousands of people walk away from Jesus because they thought he was talking about cannibalism. His own brothers didn't believe that he was the Messiah. He was accused of being a drunkard. He was accused of being demon-possessed. He couldn't do miracles in his own hometown because all of his hometown rejected him. And ultimately, he was crucified. And honestly, this to me is just, I don't even need 10 reasons. This is number one for me. I always just come back to this in conversations with people, though it is difficult if you don't fully appreciate the first century world. But this is the number one reason to me. I know they weren't lying. Because think about this. They were primarily writing to convince Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. Yet the Jews' own scripture said anybody who's hanged on a tree is cursed by God. So why would they lie and make up a story about a Messiah who was hung on a tree, hung on a cross, and cursed by God? It would be like someone saying today, like, I really want to run for president in 2024, and I want to make sure that everybody votes for me in 2024. So I'm going to go out on a campaign and tell everybody that I'm a criminal and that everybody hates me and even God hates me. Vote for me. Nobody would do that. That makes absolutely no sense. Yet the New Testament writers present Jesus as living a life of suffering and rejection, dying the death of a worthless, lowly criminal, all alone with the world hating him, and even himself crying out to God on the cross, where are you? Why have you forsaken me? Now, it is true they include a victorious resurrection of Jesus in the end, but even that is a horrible selling point to Jews because the Jews didn't think the resurrection of our bodies would happen until the end of time. So this idea that a resurrection of the body happened in the middle of history and history is still ongoing, that is absolutely absurd and so far outside the category of the way the Jews thought. Not only that, but you add to the fact that the Jews had a certain expectation about who the Messiah would be and what he would do. He was coming to crush the Romans. And all of the Jews were so excited about it. They could not wait for this Messiah to come crush the Romans and set the Jews free. But the lie that they supposedly made up about Jesus is that here's your Messiah, and instead of coming to crush the Romans, he comes to let the Romans crush him. That would just be suicidal to your lie. It would not go over well at all, which is why the New Testament makes clear that this message about Jesus could not have come from man. God makes that point, 1 Corinthians 1, that this is God's wisdom, because there's no human being on the planet who even had the thought categories to make something up like this. They would never have invented something like this because it makes humanly, to all the humans on the planet at the time, it would make absolutely no sense to anybody, Jew or Gentile. All right. Thirdly, they include demanding sayings of Jesus. Remember, we lie for our own benefit. So if you're going to lie and make up a new religious teacher, wouldn't you tend to make his teachings easier? I mean, the New Testament writers were Jews. They were under the law of Moses. The law of Moses is really strict. So if you made up a new religion, wouldn't you want to loosen the reins a little? I mean, that's always been the draw of idolatry in the Old Testament, because the idols, they don't really make the demands that the one true God does, and that's why a lot of people go after the idols, because the idols let you do what you want. So if you're going to lie and make up this whole new religion, why in the world would you make up a religion where Jesus actually puts harder demands on people than the law of Moses did in many cases? So here's my question to you. Can you think of any examples of really demanding teachings of Jesus? All right, Jared? That maybe if you were lying, you wouldn't really want to say that he said. Yeah, Jared?
Love your enemies.
Okay, yeah.
And do good for those who do bad for you.
Yeah, there
That's
you go.
pretty tough.
Love your enemies, pray for your enemies, do good things, those who do evil. Yep. Matt?
That most people aren't going to go to heaven, or in the eyes of the world, like get the good thing. Like if you're trying to sell this to everyone, hey, join our club.
Yeah.
You get the good stuff. And he's saying, no, most of you aren't going to get there.
Yeah, the whole narrow road teaching. Yeah, that's pretty tough. Lydia's got one.
Like abandoning your family and putting God first and being willing to be an outcast, especially in that culture. Being an outcast was really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Jesus said, I didn't come to bring peace in your household. I came to bring a sword that divides people from each other, so that even fathers will be enemies of their sons and mothers will be enemies of their daughters. Now, that's not Jesus' desire. He wants them all to love him and to be united, even in a stronger family. But he recognizes when a father accepts Jesus and the son does not, there's going to be tension and hostility, and it might destroy your family. And Jesus says, when that happens, you choose me over your own flesh and blood family, which is, again, very revolutionary to Jews who were all about flesh and blood, genealogies, all that relationship. And Jesus says, there's something greater. He says, these are my real mother and my brothers and my sisters and all that. He breaks down all that blood relation genealogy stuff. Yeah, Phil?
Most religions are set up for man to impress God with, for men to try to impress God with themselves.
Yeah.
Jesus says, deny yourself and take up the cross.
There you go.
So why would you do that?
Yeah.
Why would you make a religion like that?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, a lot of religions are like, here, just do all these things, and then you can please God, and God will be happy, and you can go to heaven. And Jesus, he doesn't say that. He says, you're wicked, you're evil, you can't please God on your own, you need me, and you need to die to your old self and take up your cross like me. Yeah, really good. He who loses his life for my sake will find it. He who lusts after a woman has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. After that teaching on marriage, remember the disciples actually took Jesus aside and said, this is really hard. It's better to not get married if this is the way that it's going to be. And Jesus says, yeah, that's true. Better not get married if you can't keep your vow. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. He told the rich young ruler to give up all of his possessions. Really, really hard stuff. Honestly, it seems like the Jesus that the apostles supposedly made up came to bring an impossible standard. Why would they make up a religious leader whose teachings put them in a position of being constantly guilty of falling short of this perfect standard? Yeah, Steve, and then we'll move on.
On the other end of all this, one of the most challenging sayings he also has is, I no longer call you my servants, but my friends. Every other religion practically created, if you are not the God yourself, then you are utterly and totally degenerate before him. You are fortunate just to be a slave to a almighty being of some sort. That's very common to see. It's a lot harder when you are, on one hand, totally powerless, and at the other hand, brought up into a friendship with that almighty being. That is another difficult saying, but just from a different angle.
Okay, yeah. Let me, for time's sake, let me just skip this one. You can read all these in the book, by the way. So just for time's sake, I know I'm running a little behind here. This one's, I really want to focus on this. Details, they include details about the resurrection they would have never invented. So how about this one? Joseph of Arimathea came, a prominent member of the council, that's the Sanhedrin council, who himself was waiting for the kingdom of God, and he gathered up courage and went in before Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. So think about this. The Sanhedrin council was responsible for killing Jesus. And then it was responsible for persecuting the early Christians and even tag teaming with Saul, right, to put Christians to death. And so the Sanhedrin council was like the enemy of early Christianity. So why in the world, if you're making up a story, would you portray yourself to be too cowardly to go in and request the body of Jesus, and yet your enemy, you boost him up, you boost the Sanhedrin council member up to that level? That makes no sense. Why boost your enemy up and make yourself look bad at the same time? Think about, and that was another embarrassing detail, the disciples didn't even bury Jesus. They didn't even give Jesus a proper burial. Plus, this is very risky to lie about because the Sanhedrin council is your enemy. So if Joseph finds out they've lied about him, that he actually went and buried Jesus, he's going to have all the motivation in the world to disprove this lie. And say, no, I didn't do that. I hate Jesus. I put him to death. Why would I take him down, off the cross? You only include this if it's what actually happened. How about this one? Well, I won't read that whole thing for time's sake, but it's the women who discovered the empty tomb of Jesus first. They're the first witnesses of this tomb being empty. Now, in the first century world, a woman's testimony was not valid in court. So if you're going to tell a lie, why would you claim that women were the very first ones to witness the empty tomb? It would be like me trying to frame someone with a crime, but I make a 5-year-old my star witness. Okay, it wouldn't make sense. Now, I'm not saying women are 5-year-olds. I'm not saying women's testimony is actually not valid in court. I'm saying that's how they were viewed in this first century world. So it would make absolutely no sense to make the women the first eyewitnesses of the empty tomb unless it actually happened. And again, think about this. The writers are making the women more courageous than themselves. They were too afraid. They didn't want to be associated with Jesus' tomb in any way. They didn't go. The women did, though. The women were braver than the men. You wouldn't write it that way, okay, unless it happened that way. More than 30 characters confirmed by history. We talked about that already. Many very important people as well. Sorry, I took so long in that chart. I got to at least show it to you. It's one thing to make up lies about like random peasants in Galilee, okay, but it's really hard to make up conversations that Jesus had with these people in power. Okay, these are prominent people in society and in world history, and they've all been confirmed. All these people really existed at the specific times that the New Testament said that they existed. So really, really impressive there. They include divergent details. We talked a lot about the interlocking eyewitness testimony, and I included a quote from a detective who became a Christian based on the details of eyewitness testimony. Tonight, I'll just mention Simon Greenleaf. Simon Greenleaf, he was a Harvard law professor who wrote the gold standard study on what constitutes legal evidence. This was back in the 1800s. I mean, his study is like he determined this is what is legitimate legal evidence, and he himself became a Christian in the same way, looking at the eyewitness testimonies of the Gospels. And he said this: the 4 Gospels would have been received in evidence in any court of justice without the slightest hesitation. Okay. Number 8, they challenge readers to verify the facts for themselves. Remember, Paul told Festus and Herod Agrippa, look, these things haven't been done in a corner. I know that you know that they're true. Paul, when he mentions the resurrection, he said Jesus appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom remain until now. They're still alive. You can go ask them. You can go check what I'm telling you. Number 9, miracles are described simply and without embellishment. It's fascinating to me how the miraculous accounts are just all so matter of fact in the Gospels. It's never presented like, you guys are never going to believe this. This is the most amazing thing you've ever heard in your life. Jesus healed this blind man. It was just, there were crowds and people were going wild and they couldn't believe. It's just like, no, Jesus healed a blind man. And then just, move on. very nonchalantly, almost kind of, and I like the word Turek uses, bland. He says that the accounts are kind of bland of Jesus' miracles. They're not fanciful. They don't have the tone of a legend. In fact, Turek gives an example of an embellished, legendary-sounding miracle from a Gnostic gospel written in the 2nd century, which was, the Gnostics were false teachers. But this was from the Gospel of Peter. And in the Gospel of Peter, at the resurrection, there was a flying cross that followed Jesus, out of the tomb, and the cross could talk, and the cross was talking to people. And there were 2 angels with Jesus, and the angels, their heads were so big that they reached from earth to heaven. This big old giant-headed angels, and there were large crowds to see it. There was a huge crowd, and they all saw the flying, talking cross, and they all saw the crazy big-headed angels. Okay. In the gospel accounts, there are no crowds at the tomb. And while there are certainly miracles accompanying the resurrection, they're spoken about so matter-of-factly as, again, to almost be bland. And they don't have a bizarre tone of a legend. You'd also think, I thought this was interesting, especially because the resurrection was the most important event in all of Christianity. It's the foundation for all of Christianity. There would be far more detail provided, far more hype, and maybe even far more explanation in the Gospels about all the theological implications, and Jesus rose from the dead, so here's what this means for us in our life. But again, it's treated very nonchalantly. Right? Jesus rose from the dead, because that's just what happened. And that's all. It has the ring of authenticity. And then finally here, the writers abandoned their long-held beliefs and died for it. If you and your ancestors grew up under the law of Moses for the last 1,500 years, you know how hard it would be to change your religious views? Not only is change hard in general, but if you change your religious views, you're alienating yourself from your Jewish family and your whole Jewish community, and even from your God, from the God of the Jews that your family has served for 1,500 years. But if you think about it, why would a group of Jews make up a lie that led them to abandon the entire animal sacrifice system? That led them to abandon circumcision and the need to keep the Sabbath day, to start worshiping a man as God, when God had been against that, right, throughout all their scriptures, and to change their view completely about the Messiah coming to conquer the Romans, and instead adopting a new view that the Romans conquered the Messiah so that the Messiah could conquer sin and Satan and death. These are radical changes in beliefs that brought them suffering and rejection and ultimately a life of hardship and death. From a worldly perspective, this would mean they fabricated a lie that ruined their lives and then took their lives from them in the end. Now, final thing here. It is true, people die for lies all the time. Muslim martyrs, for instance, and he specifically in the book compares Islam to Christianity. You can read more detail about that in the book because he's trying to show that of the monotheistic religions, Islam is not legitimate. But Muslim martyrs, they may give their lives for lies about Muhammad, but the difference is those martyrs actually believe that it's true. But no one dies for a lie that they know is true. People die for lies they think are true, but not for lies they know are true. And because the apostles were eyewitnesses of Jesus' miracles, they're in a position to know whether or not the things that happened were true. And interestingly, the Quran never records any miracles by Muhammad. Miracles were not attributed to him until 100 years after his death. So the people claiming that he performed miracles may have genuinely believed it, but they were not eyewitnesses to be able to prove that those things did not actually happen. And so they might be willing to die in that case for belief in those miracles. Plus, in the early spread of Islam, people were not killed for believing in Islam. They were killed for not believing it. So there actually was a legitimate motivation for people to believe lies about Muhammad because it would save your own skin to adopt your belief in Muhammad. With Christianity, it was the opposite. They were eyewitnesses in the position to know whether the miracles were true, and they could be killed for believing it, which means they had no motivation to believe it unless it was absolutely true. All right, so that's 10 reasons that we know that they were not lying. Tim, Lord willing, on Sunday, we'll talk about Was it just a misunderstanding? Or can we really trust that Jesus did rise from the dead? Thank you guys so much for your good participation.